There are.
Good afternoon and welcome to the FEMA Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness webinar series. My name is Allison Albright and I am the Regional Preparedness Liaison for FEMA Region 2. I'm going to provide a few technical considerations before we begin. Today's proceedings are being recorded and captioned. The archived event will be available on the Region 2 website in the coming days. You should hear audio through your computer speakers, so please ensure your volume is turned up so you may hear the proceedings accordingly. In the top corner under the video, we'd ask if you'd like to receive news and updates from Region 2, and if so, please enter your email address and we'll be sure to add you to our distribution list. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation concludes. You'll see a Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner. Please feel free to submit your questions about the subject matter there, and time permitting, we'll do our best to answer them. Finally, the PowerPoint presentation from today will be made available for you to download in the file share pod at the end of the presentation as a PDF. You can click on the file share pod and click download at the end of the presentation. And with that, I would turn it over to Region 2 Community Preparedness Officer to introduce our speaker and today's proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Costa, the Community Preparedness Officer for FEMA Region 2. On behalf of our team working to strengthen preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, I'm thrilled to welcome you to our Preparedness and Resilience webinar series. FEMA's 4-year strategic plan, Goal 1, is to build a culture of preparedness. The Region 2 Individual Community Preparedness Division is focused on helping people prepare for disasters, which includes increasing the percentage of people with savings set aside for an emergency, delivering training to help nonprofits, small businesses, and community-based organizations continue service delivery following a disaster, helping people prepare for disasters in a COVID-19 environment, and increasing the percentage of people who have taken preparedness actions. As part of that goal, we're pleased to be hosting this webinar on the science behind some of the challenges in communicating risk information effectively. Thomas Song will cover techniques based on behavioral research that will help make your messaging stick and help inspire action. Thomas has been practicing the oldest profession in the world, sales, for 25 plus years. For more than half that time, he worked on Wall Street using proven sales techniques and relationship management strategies. He joined FEMA in 2010 and has led Region 2's outreach on flood hazards. Thomas uses principles in selling to win over indifferent or skeptical audiences. He has also served as a communications coach, developing training to help emergency managers influence the behaviors of decision makers and the public. And I'm happy to welcome you today, Thomas, and to hand the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you, Deb. And I want to go back to this first slide. You're all probably looking at this image, and you're thinking the same exact thing I am. Can you really be in the fried chicken business and have such a skinny stick figure? Well, whether it's intended or not, the colonel's bow tie makes him look like a stick figure. Now, for some of you, you won't be able to unsee this. And in fact, this is something that you may pass along to others. And this is what we need to achieve with our messaging. The ideas and the topics that we discuss, we want them to stick in people's minds. And not only that, have them share it with others. Because if we do this right, our ideas can inspire action, and we can have others help us achieve our goals. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As Deb said, I have done sales my whole life, and I consider myself continuing to do sales and relationship management. While I don't have a product to sell, I feel like I'm in the business of selling risk management. And what I've learned is that no matter what it is, we face the same challenges. And, you know, we've all been communicating literally our whole lives. And so we may take certain things for granted because it's easy to share information with people. But what we find the challenge to be is to have people buy into what we have to say or overcome that indifference or skepticism. And in emergency management, the stakes are high. Right? We are empowered to help others so that they can save themselves from the impacts of hazards, whether natural or otherwise. And for many of you who have talked to survivors, have seen the devastation that these events can cause, you've heard the stories. Right? They're painful. They're heartbreaking. And if we can do anything to eliminate or even reduce the impact of the next disaster, that is a huge win. Right? On paper, it's easy. You get impacted, you recover, you rebuild. But what we see, the practice, people are afraid, people are insecure, people are under a lot of stress. And it's better that we eliminate them from having to do that whenever possible. This is our mission statement, FEMA's mission statement, short and to the point. And while we practice our emergency management through supporting our stakeholders, our state partners, the local officials, keep in mind that the beneficiary of everything we do is that one person, that one family. And we shouldn't lose focus on that, because while we are on the federal level looking at emergency management and disaster in a very macro sense, big picture, our work comes down to helping that one person, that one family. And so it's extremely important that we succeed in doing what we do. And look, one thing the agency is great at is we have some amazing information. We build awareness. What we may be lacking is having that inspire the actions needed, because information alone is just not going to cut it. I want to start off with a poll today. I know we have a lot of people online, but I'd like to get a sense of what you're all expecting in today's webinar. Are you looking to be a better educator or a stronger influencer? We'll give everybody about 20 seconds. And I think, Callie, you've made a comment, they go together, and you're absolutely right. Look, there is no wrong answer here. You cannot, one does not preclude the other. You can educate and influence, and you can influence and educate. It's important, though, that we keep this in mind. You can't have one without the other. And so today we're going to touch upon both. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to go over these three items. Now, the first one, we're going to go over the hurdles we face when we do engage people. What's going on in other people's heads that are holding them back from accepting what we have to say? But also, what goes on in our own heads? Because for us to be better communicators, we need to be introspective. Right? We need to understand more about ourselves to help others. The second part, we'll talk about talking points. What are the ingredients needed to cook up those talking points that really make an impression, leave a lasting impression on folks, and that which can inspire folks to do the right things. And then finally, we'll go over some techniques on how to make that delivery. Because what we've seen is that the information alone does not always equate to the actions. And how we present this information can make all the difference. And so many of you you're all at different ranges of experience. Some of you have been doing this forever. Some of you have just started. And what I would like to ask in the next 40 minutes, suspend your disbelief. Right? Keep an open mind. Because innovation doesn't happen when we are anchored to traditional or conventional thought. To understand that what is possible, sometimes we just have to have a clean slate. And this is something that I learned back in the 90s. Now, I was in a team building exercise, and the instructor had us go in our own groups, and we were supposed to come up with a fictitious airline. And we were supposed to have a logo, a motto, and we had a paper airplane to build. And those airplanes would be tested. We would have a kind of a race to see which one would go further. Well, I put my hand up to make the paper airplane because I enjoy making paper airplanes. And they gave us a piece of paper, rubber band, a paper clip, and a pencil. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to be unconventional. I'm going to use all these non-traditional items to build my airplane. And so when it came time to test our planes, I was very proud of myself. I used all these items that you normally wouldn't, and I threw my plane across the room, went about halfway, beating everyone so far, and I was happy. The group after ours came up with this. I don't know if you guys can see this, but they took their paper, rolled it into a ball, and tied a pencil with a rubber band around it. And they threw it effortlessly across the room. I was in disbelief, shocked. The idea that this could be an airplane never even came to my mind. And why? Their motto was something like, uniquely designed to get you where you want, fast. But my limitations were self-imposed. And since then, I have never, ever looked at a problem and said, you know what, there's only one way to do this. And I would ask you to do the same. Really think of things. Be creative, because it will be amazing what you will be able to accomplish. And sometimes the things that hold you down can be improved. So now we're going to go over the hurdles. Right? Communicating is easy. We've done it our lives, as I said. But how do we make that impact? How do we influence people? And there's science and there's an art. And to the science, Daniel Kahneman is a renowned researcher in behavioral science. And he came up with he wrote this book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. What his research came up with was that there are two ways our minds work, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is an overachiever, gets out there in the front, does all the work or tries to. And System 1 is reactive, instinctive, and very quick, builds a lot of shortcuts over the time. And System 2 is kind of our critical thinking, takes its time. And as an example of System 1, and you guys can use your chat box for the answers, but throw out a couple random questions. What's 2 plus 2? 4, right? This is something that we've all learned as children and have applied. Simple math. As opposed to if I said, what's 112 times 87? Then your System 2 would have to take over because we can't just instinctively come up with the answer. And it's not just math. I mean, there are also behavioral things, like at a stoplight, what do you do at a green light? Right, you go. And again, for those who are drivers or non-drivers, we all know that the traffic light has certain lights, has certain colors, and each color tells us what we are allowed to do. And even things that are more narrative, stories, and there are biblical stories that you don't have to be Christian to know. Like, how many of each animal did Moses bring to the ark? 2. Anyone say 0? None. And I think whoever said none, you're right. Because it wasn't Moses, it was Noah. But for most people, our system 1 takes over on that question. We hear how many of each animal, we hear ark, and we kind of disregard the others, the other information. And Moses, 2-syllable name, like Noah. Moses is a biblical figure, like Noah. And so we just kind of brush it off and answer the question based on what we know are the critical things. How many of each animal in the ark? And so that example really shows that this can happen at any time. So really, for yourself, take that time to ensure your system 2 is engaged. And then when you're sharing or engaging others, make sure that's how they're getting it as well. And you do that by asking questions. Don't just make a statement and assume that they understand and move on to the next. One of the other things that we encounter is cognitive dissonance. And Leon Festinger, another researcher, back in the 70s, ran an experiment where he had college students do the most tedious and mundane task. And they had a board with these square pegs, and they were asked to rotate those pegs 15 degrees and continue doing it. Boring. Nothing happened when they turned those pegs. Then at the end, he asked them, we have somebody in the next room waiting to do the same thing you did. And he asked those people, I want you to go out there and I want you to promote this as something fun and exciting. And he paid half that group $20, which probably now the equivalent would be maybe $200, and the other half, $1. And then both groups went out there. And here's what they found. That the group that got paid the $1 did a better job than the ones that got paid more. It's almost counterintuitive. But according to his research, it's cognitive dissonance, right? When you have two ideas kind of that are not in alignment or conflicting with each other in your head, it causes a discomfort. And you have to change one side of it to alleviate that discomfort. So for that group who got paid the $1, or nothing, basically, for them to go out there and deceive the next person, it almost didn't make any sense. Why would you do this for $1? So in their mind, they started remembering what they did as something that was fun and exciting. And they have videos of this where they're talking to this other student and they're saying, oh yeah, it was great. And then Leon Festinger took it one other step and he brought those same folks who got paid the $1 and he interviewed them again. And he asked them, what did you think of the task of turning those square pegs? And most of them said, yeah, it was fun and I would do it again. So in their mind, they remembered their experience different than what initially happened, because there was that imbalance or the conflict. So this is interesting because oftentimes we encounter people, rational, educated people, who may not be taking what we have to say to heart, maybe providing opposition to it, which on a basis that doesn't seem very rational. Later on, there was more research done in cognitive dissonance where it showed that most people think of themselves as smart, as moral, and as rational. And they also thought of themselves as better looking than they really are, but I don't know how you prove that, and we won't get into that topic. But the interesting thing is most people really do think, hey, I'm a smart person and I'm a rational thinker. And yet Drew Weston, in his research back in the 90s involving a presidential race, he came to the conclusion that we are not as rational as we think we are. And he has actual proof where he was showing the two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, opposing viewpoints. So the Democrats got Republican talking points, the Republicans got Democratic talking points. And what he found was that neither party or neither side was swayed, but in fact they started to dig in. And when they did a brain scan, you would think that it would be the rational part of the brain that was lighting up. But in reality, it was the part of the brain that regulates your emotions. And what they saw was it was an emotional issue. People made an emotional decision. And then, when they finally came up to their conclusion, they received some sense of satisfaction. And so what we can think about, everything about cognitive dissonance and making emotional decisions, is that people have an existing belief, right? That core belief. And what they'll do is they'll surround it with information that affirms that belief, right? And this is what we call confirmation bias, that we seek things that reaffirm what we believe, and they'll use it as a shield, as some type of armor in front of them. And when we come in and we use our science and we use our research, we usually try to hit these people head on. And there's no wonder we can't get through. So what we're going to talk about is about making the talking point not about attacking or taking on that opposition head on, but weakening their connection, that core belief's connection to everything that they've been putting in front of them to protect that position. And then bringing our ideas and making that connection to their belief, aligning our thoughts or the advice that we want to provide to align it with what they believe at the core. So how do we do that? Well, we need to figure out what are the ingredients of those talking points that can make that lasting impression, leave that, punch through that resistance. Poll number 2. Everyone can just look at their screen, take their time, and we'll give everyone about 30 seconds. And you have to answer one. I know there may not be enough information to answer it, but you have to answer it, at least make one choice. Okay, so what I can gather from the poll box, it is slightly skewed towards number 2. And, you know, I'm not asking you these questions to trick you. These are research questions that have been done in the past, and again, not in these circumstances, but I thought it would be interesting as a telltale sign of some of the things that we'll be talking about. Because in this instance, this is kind of an example of how people are just not good at probability or statistics. It's not to say that you should be, but oftentimes in emergency management, we use that kind of information, that data, because we feel like we can defend it, and we use it as kind of our main talking point. But yet, if people don't really get it, should we put as much emphasis as we do now? In this question, let's just say there are only 10 professions that exist, and being a bank teller is one of them. Well, so Linda has a 10% chance of being a bank teller. But it's even less probable for two things to be happening at the same time. So Linda has to be a bank teller and an activist. And so the probability is she's more likely to be that bank teller. And yet we get all this noise, all this other information, and we make these connections. Something to do with System 1, something to do with our own background or our own mindset. And so we need to be careful, because when we are engaging others, we need to ensure we are hearing what they are trying to tell us. Now, one of the other things of how we present information is, are we being relatable? There are things we talk about. The 1% annual chance flood. What does that mean to the average person? What does that mean to the local elected official, the decision makers? Does it mean that you have a 1% chance of being flooded? No, it does not. The 1% annual chance flood indicates a level, how high the water would go, how fast it would travel, and how it would go from high ground to low ground. And so the probability of being flooded is much greater than 1%. But this is how people could maybe misconstrue that as, I have 99% chance of not being flooded. And so we need to ensure that as we communicate our information, this risk information, people can relate to it. Now, here's an example where this organization, back in the 90s, they did some research on buttered popcorn, movie theater popcorn. Now, I'm not going to get into the specific movie theater, but back then, they came up with a medium buttered popcorn having 48 grams of saturated fat. That sounds like a lot to me, but I don't know. I don't know what a lot of saturated fat means, how bad it is for you. And you probably have to be a nutritionist or someone who's really a calorie counter to really understand. Because I think the average person would probably not understand. But this is the way they explained it. A medium buttered popcorn has the same amount of fat as 6 Big Macs. Now do you understand? And so we really need to think of, how do we get our information, our ideas, our data, and how do we make that relatable? How do we get people to really understand? Because if you tell them that 48 grams of saturated fat is going to cause you heartburn or even worse, give you coronary disease, what does that mean? It's just a number. If you told them you ate 6 Big Macs, they all know how that makes them feel. So use examples that people understand, because not everyone thinks like we do. Not everyone is a professional emergency manager, nor should they be. We should be the ones who are able to express our ideas simply, have them resonate, and reflect what people would understand. And another thing we can do is kind of take a different twist on things. And this next ad, I learned that you can save money by buying a BMW. Drives like $1 million. Anything you pay under that, you save money. And this is interesting because, they took a normal concept of luxury cars costing a lot of money and flipped that on its head. This is how people will remember some of the things that we have to say. Take a new tack. Again, sometimes walk away from what we've done before, that conventional or traditional approach, and examine it. Can we take a different twist to it? How do we make it stay? And whether or not they may remember the details, they will remember the main points whether it is that natural hazards are dangerous, that there are actions that they can take, and they know that this is something that they either need to study on or take the advice that you're providing. And, let me go back to what we say about FEMA providing awareness. We have a lot of great information, but there are things that we provide that people may not connect to. Superstorm Sandy cost $70 billion of damage. Does anyone even know what $70 billion means? It's so big, it's almost a fake number. For the average person or the average mayor, they have no idea what that number is like. 650,000 homes. Again, it's hard for people to empathize with numbers and statistics, especially ones that are so large, because we as professionals, we're looking at the world in a macro picture. We see how big these storms are, and we drill down and we work with our local partners to make that impact and help people on the local level. But when we share this information, we can't expect them to value this as we do. Hurricane Maria, $91 billion. Does that really tell you what that effect was? Or you take it downscale. You share a story, like this person's story. In the aftermath of Maria, he's trying to get food. And in his story, he comes up with a revelation. This is how stray dogs and cats feel. That makes an impact. We can empathize with this person. We understand. It is not a number. It is a human being who we all share the same insecurities. We feel the pain, the insecurity of getting food and being afraid. And that can cause an emotional response. And as we're learning, if people are making decisions based on emotions, shouldn't we be taking our message and having that really hit upon their emotions? At the end of the day, whatever you come up with, at the very least, you can be organized. Make sure that everything you're coming up with makes sense, there's a connection. Because sometimes when we just give a laundry list of items, people don't remember. And we're going to do a little exercise here. So I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds, look at the letters here, and see how many you can remember in the right order. So I'll give everyone 30 seconds. Okay. How many of you guys remember? I'll bring the letters again. Some of you may 5, 7. Anyone remember all of them? 8. Very good, Jeanette. 2. Okay, Daniel, at least you tried. Oh, there you go. 15. Wow. Okay. Oh, how about this? What if we organize the letters this way? Now, do you think you can remember all of them? And some of you may have caught on to that. But these letters were not rearranged. They're the same letters, grouped differently. So when you're thinking about and organizing your thoughts and how you're going to present them, just make sure it makes sense. Make sure there is some type of connection or a logic that can make it more memorable for the person on the other end. All right, so finally to the last section, what we'll do is we're going to go over some of the techniques. I'll take a page out of our sales book, the sales training that I've taught in the past. And it was interesting how we can apply this to emergency management and communicating risk information. Now, in my research, I found that, hey, you know, the FBI has this, what they call a behavioral change stairwell model. And this is what they use for hostage negotiations. And this is very similar to a sales process. But the first thing you need to do is you need to disarm, and maybe in the FBI it's more literal, but in the sales process, you need to disarm people. You need to get their defenses down. Because if they have their defenses up, whatever you say won't have the same impact that you want it to, or they just ignore you. And once you get their defenses down, they will be more open to listening to your ideas. And there are a few techniques you can do. Now, the first, when somebody says something, objects to what you have to say, or shares an idea, you listen intently, and you say it back to them better than they said it. And try that even in a social setting, someone you don't know, or you just met. When they say something, just repeat what they just said, but say it even better. And when you do that, people think, oh, you really understand me. And that allows their defenses to go down. Because nobody wants to hear something from someone who doesn't get it. Right? Our golden rule is, you know, people don't mind learning. They do mind being corrected. And so when you can lower their defenses, you have a better insight into what they're thinking. And once you have that opportunity, you can really connect with them. And then, as we said earlier, weaken their connection. Whatever that existing belief is, to whatever they're using as a defense, weaken that connection and replace that with your idea. And it takes a bit of negotiation. And look, people spend years learning how to negotiate. And we're just going to go over this very briefly. There is what they call position-based negotiations, which is something that in William Urey's book, Getting to Yes, he talks about how that this way both parties can win. And what he was telling everyone is that when people come in with two opposing positions, they're at a conflict. But you have to understand what the intent is, why they have that position. And he uses an example back in the late 60s. Now, I'm going to oversimplify Middle Eastern politics. But back in the 60s, the Israeli army occupied an area in Egypt that was along their borders. And they did so because there were rocket attacks coming from the Egyptian side into Israel. The Israeli army comes, secures that land, and now they're negotiating. The Israeli army doesn't want to give up that protection, and Egypt wants their sacred land back. And this goes on for years until they finally uncover or discuss what it is that they're both trying to accomplish. The Israelis wanted the protection. They wanted the rocket attacks to stop. And the Egyptians wanted their land. And so what they decided was that the Egyptians would demilitarize that border area so that the attacks would not happen and that the Israeli army would leave. Both parties got what they wanted. And you couldn't tell by the position, the initial position, but they achieved the intent. And that's what's important. And so when you hear people speak that goes against what you have to say or is questioning what you have to say, really try to understand what it is or why they're actually saying it. Because you can find that they're actually thinking the same thing you are. They're just getting at it in a different way that's resulting in a different end. And if you can just kind of move that path a little bit, they can reach the same end that you want them to. And one of the tools that William Urey, in a different book he wrote, was a positive no, is how you can disagree with people, but not be confrontational about it. So he has what they call a yes, no, yes sandwich. People want to feel like their position is valid. they want to feel validated. So you don't have to agree with what people say, but you can give them credit for believing what it is, for believing that, for having that belief. Nobody wants to hear that they're wrong. Once you do that, their defenses get up, and they'll fight you tooth and nail. But if you tell them, I understand why you've come to this conclusion, then and then it will, again, disarm them. And then you can provide your reasoning. And don't leave it there, but at the end, come to some understanding of how we can all work together, or how it's thus not the end, and how we can take this another step. And I'll give you an example. So working with flood maps, we often get mayors or city administrators or community leaders saying, hey, this area has never flooded in 50 years or 100 years. Yes, that information, that historic information is extremely important. We're happy you shared that with us. And what we've seen is that historic information gets incorporated with our study. And what we show is that if these waters were to hit a certain height and move in this certain direction, that we would see water in the low areas of your community, which would affect these homes. So let's continue to talk. And please provide us that information, and let's continue this dialogue, and so that we can get the most accurate information for your community. So in a sense, what we're saying is, know your information is important, but we're still going to go ahead with what we believe or our technology or science has shown. But we won't stop there. We want to include you in this process, and we want to continue talking because your opinion, your insight, and your feedback are extremely important. And so you don't leave people with a bad taste, but you continue that dialogue, and you can be more of an ally than being an opposing party. So here's poll number 3. And again, I'll give everybody about 30 seconds to do this. You have to answer the question. I know there may not be enough information, but please do so, the best of your ability. Okay, so the results look like you're kind of contrarian or contrary to what the researcher from the London School of Business came up with. His research showed that we often get bombarded with too much information, and when you do bring too much information to win an argument, it often dilutes itself. He was inspired to do his research based on a pharmaceutical ad, where they start talking about the side effects, and he noticed that there was one drug that had a side effect of stroke, heart attack, high blood pressure, dizziness, and then they had the listing of red eyes and itchy feet, and he thought that was really interesting. But the fact that when he used the word when they said itchy feet, what that was intended to do was kind of dilute everything that was said before. And so what he was postulating was, if the side effects just had the major ones, where this drug can cause a heart attack or a stroke, that would make people think, oh, that drug could be very dangerous. But when you add a litany of side effects, especially ones that are kind of superficial, itchy feet, sore ankles, then all of a sudden, all the other ones kind of get diffused. And so the point I was trying to make here is, when you are presenting your viewpoints against a group that may not be listening or believing in what you have to say, don't just keep piling on more information. Stick to your talking points. Stick to the big ones. No more than 3. And really come back and reiterate it or tweak it to match what the circumstances call for. The other thing is, sometimes we can go give our side of the position as kind of a laundry list. We talk about facts because we do deal in science. We have engineers. We have statistics. But throughout history, stories were always used to inform people. It goes back to the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, and even before that, the ancient Greek stories, of the Iliad and the Odyssey, where if you've read the book, the story not only tells of these heroic feats, maybe it tells you of the cultural values, but it also talks about how you treat visitors. There are many parts of the story where somebody would come into somebody else's home, and that poem would say you would take their sandals off, you would wash their feet, you would give them food, give them wine. And in this story, what they were doing for generations to come was to pass along not only the cultural values, but some of the customs as well. And the stories is how our minds work. We listen, we can put ourselves in a position, or we can observe it as a third party, and it makes more sense. If you think of some of the greatest speeches of our time, the Gettysburg Address, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, they didn't say, hey, I came up with a list of pros and cons for slavery. He told a story. And through that story, we felt their words. And this is something that we can use as well because, again, we got to go back to the emotional part of our arguments. Can we make our points to strike an emotional chord? Because the things we do, how we save people, how we protect people, these are things that nobody wants others to go through. One of the other things I want to really bring up is, I've been to a lot of webinars and meetings where people kind of go on, and I hope I'm not doing that today, but, keep things short. And there's this fear that if you don't if you keep it too short, it won't have an impact. And so there's a story of Ernest Hemingway. A gentleman walks into a bar in West Palm Beach, sees Ernest Hemingway in a corner, smoking a cigar, drinking his drink. This man is a fan, walks over to the table, tries to engage Ernest Hemingway in a conversation. And the writer wanted nothing to do with him. So the man gets upset, and he challenges the writer and says, I will pay for all your drinks if you can come up with a story, a compelling story using only 6 words. Ernest Hemingway smokes a cigar, takes a sip, thinks about it, and writes this. You can make a compelling story. You can have compelling points and don't have to write a dissertation or spend too much time thinking it. So really, think of what works for you or what you think has a lot of sway, and try to boil it down to the must-haves. And don't get into the nice-to-knows. Really, with people's attention spans getting less and less every year or every generation, keep it short and get to the point. Okay, so at this point, we're going to get into the Q&A. Do we have time for a Q&A, Deb?
We certainly do.
Okay, awesome. So before I say my closing words, I guess we'll take some questions.
Sure. You kind of caught me off guard. I was researching. There were some words left off of one of the slides that some folks were asking about on the behavior change. It said show how their beliefs are, and then you kind of left people hanging and wanting more. So for those of you that wrote in, I just put it in the chat box. show how their beliefs are reflected in your ideas.
Yes. Sorry. Oh, I meant to do that just to keep people asking for more. I wanted to see who was paying attention.
They were definitely paying attention. So what's the number one book or article or website that you would suggest in regard to today's topic?
Oh, boy. There are so many of them, and I think it all kind of depends on what you're really interested in. There are a number of good books out there. The Thinking Fast and Slow is a great book to read. There's a book called Nudge, which is another one, talking about paternal libertarianism. It's basically convincing people to do things, but without really convincing them. I'd have to think about it, and I think you can send me an email, and I'll come up with a reading list for you, because there's just so many. And I think what would help is if you tell me what it is that you're really interested in. Is it that the behavioral science part? Is it the influence? Is it how to engage people? And then I can kind of come up with narrow the books down.
Okay. I have to tell you, when you mentioned that first book earlier, I actually went on to Amazon as you were speaking and ordered it myself. So I expect that to be here next week.
Well, I would say, you know what, audiobooks are amazing. Back in the days when we used to drive, if you had a 3-4 hour drive, an audiobook really passes the time, and this stuff is so interesting that you won't even feel the time fly by.
Okay, good. I'm not that crazy about of books that are so dry that they put you to sleep every night. One of our listeners asked, how do you get your voice heard over all the noise in the media, the social media, the fallacies? I feel like we probably encounter a lot of that at FEMA.
Yeah.
There's always, some anti-FEMA rhetoric out there, and they're kind of overshadowing the message that we're trying to get out.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, the most important thing is we have to understand what's the cause of it. Again, don't take it on the surface. What is that root cause? What are they thinking? What's that belief? And, on a large scale, that's harder to do. On an individual or a smaller scale, really ask those questions. Find out what it is their belief is. And there are examples where, and I don't want to get controversial with what's going on now, but this whole mask wearing thing, is it really just on the surface that, hey, it's my freedom, or do people feel, insecure? They feel foolish? Because I can tell you, in the beginning, when I was wearing a mask, I felt a little, self-conscious about it, especially when you go in an area where there's nobody wearing a mask or what have you. So that kind of insecurity can be a real cause of that, because that's very painful. Social stigmas are very, very painful. So to us, if you walk into a room with 100 people and 99 people are doing one thing, there is research that shows that we are going to be very compelled to act just like them. So there are root causes to some of this opposition that is beyond what we hear on the surface. And so I honestly think this just questioning people and really finding out what it is that's motivating their particular action. And then once you have that, you're going to be in a better position to counteract it.
Okay, great. We just have time, I think, for one more question. Do you think there are differences across cultures within the tips shared?
Within the tips shared, cultural differences, I think it's huge. And let me tell you, I've worked in New Jersey and New York, not so much Puerto Rico, but if you go to New Jersey and you tell them, hey, the folks in New York are doing this, they use some expletives. They say, we don't care. There are coastal areas that don't care about the inland areas. Puerto Rico is a whole nother, it's a different culture as well. West Coast, East Coast, rural, urban. You need to be like them. Because if you come out as an outsider who doesn't understand, why would they want to listen to you? But if you express an interest, hey, you guys think this way. Can you explain why? Well, that's really interesting. I see why you would think this way. again, you align with them. And I'm telling you, it's amazing what kind of effect that you get. Next time you're at a party or meeting people, just try to use this, and you'll see, look at their eyes and look at their disposition. You'll see that sometimes there's a huge change.
Okay. Thomas, is it okay if I put your email address in the chat? There are some folks who are asking for that reading list. And,
yeah, sure.
It'll just be the folks that are on today's webinar that will see that. If you guys want the information regarding the reading list, reach out to Thomas. We are putting up a very brief 4-question survey that will really help us, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to let us know what you think overall of this particular presentation, how useful the content is for you, whether or not you'd be interested in future webinars on the same topic. I know that Thomas and I have discussed the effective presentation strategies as a potential presentation. Is that something that our listeners would be interested in, that would help them, do their jobs even better? And what you thought about the overall length, how the slides and everything were. So any of that information that you guys, if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute or two to answer those 4 questions. I do want to let you know that we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 webinars scheduled for the remainder of August. We have hurricane readiness for emergency managers in Spanish next week, preparedness resources for power-dependent medical equipment population on the 18th. On August 19th, we're going to be prepping for National Preparedness Month, which is in September. We will have folks from External Affairs at FEMA headquarters talking about the tools that FEMA has available for you to help spread the preparedness message. We'll also have New York City Emergency Management and New Jersey Office of Emergency Management talking about how they use the tools to drive their own messaging. Keeping in the theme with communications, we will have folks talking about effective, accessible communications. So making your communications available to all types of people that, maybe aren't like you and I. And back to school safety on the 25th, and a more in-depth accessible communications on the 27th. We have a whole series in September on Tuesdays that are just going to run for 30 minutes. But we'll go through each of the FEMA programs in Region 2. So we'll have either myself or Allison will be talking about individual preparedness. We'll have someone from mitigation talking about different steps that homeowners can take to be better prepared. Someone from grants will be talking about the fireman grants that are available to firehouses throughout the region, how they could be utilized, and someone talking about FEMA's role in response. Sometimes we just need to get back to basics. And those are really all, like I said, just 30 minutes, very short and informative presentations. I guess in essence, building on what Thomas said today, we don't need a really long presentation. We don't have to use a lot of words to get our message across. Right. So hopefully me and the other speakers have paid attention today, and we're able to deliver some good presentations for you in September. Thomas, I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
All the comments that I see in the chat box are thanking you and, saying how interesting and useful it was, and we really appreciate you taking the time. We also appreciate everybody who logged in today. Thank you so much for joining us. The link on the screen right now is a link that contains all of our previously recorded webinars. So today's webinar will be up there in a week or so's time, but all the webinars up till now have been recorded and are on that site if you'd like to take a look. Everyone, you are free to drop. Have a beautiful day. Thomas, if you want to hang on a minute.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.